A student might ask a thought-provoking question, and they're told, no, we can't talk about that right now, and they get the door slammed shut in their face. What type of world do I want my daughters and my son to grow up in? I don't want them to live in a world where the color of their skin dictates whether they are allowed to read a book honestly or not. And so in the public school system, it's revealing itself more and more as to be a place to train people to fall in line.
Hello, and welcome to Awake at the Wheel. So before we jump into today's topic, I'm going to introduce it by telling a bit of a story. So since I was in grade 10, so since the age of 15, To Kill a Mockingbird has been my favorite book. It was the mandatory reading back in grade 10, and then I read it a few times subsequently after that. What I loved about this book was I felt that Harper Lee did such a beautiful job of balancing some really serious topics like racism and sexual assault, and then balancing that with the innocence of childhood, summertime, and family. So back in grade 10, like I said, this was the mandatory reading, and we did a whole unit on it, and that was that. After that, we had a subsequent unit where we had to select a social issue and do a project on it. So I was so inspired by what I read in To Kill a Mockingbird that I wanted to do my project on racism. And racism wasn't a topic that was just suddenly new to me and interesting to me. Back in the 8th grade, I did my speech on this because it was something that wasn't really talked about back then. So when I presented this topic to my teacher, I shared with her I was very intrigued by learning more about it. And this book gave me just different insight and different understanding of it. And I wanted to dig deeper into it. So her response to me was, well, Malini, don't you think we talked about that enough in the last unit? And I was just kind of taken aback and shrugged my shoulders and said, okay, I guess I will pick a different topic. So I share this story to illustrate how far the other way now the pendulum has swung with regard to this topic in schools and the way that it's approached and so on and so forth. So the following news clip really, really caught my eye. We're going to share this in just a second. But as soon as I saw this, given that this is my favorite book, I really thought, you know what, we have to have a further discussion about this. So let's watch the news clip.
While students at West Valley High School prepare for summer vacation,
I found the spot.
Matthew Mastronardi is fighting to keep his teaching job.
I read a couple passages.
All because he took a risk and read out loud a passage from the American literary classic To Kill a Mockingbird.
Don't you believe a word he says, Dill.
Not just any passage, but the one featuring the N-word, which is used in the book dozens of times.
Talking about the word
The N-word.
The N-word.
The third-year Spanish teacher says he was trying to make a point to his students about the importance of academic freedom after another teacher instructed students to skip over that controversial word.
I think that's unfortunate because you miss out on engaging with the text in an honest way.
Problem for Mastronardi.
I said California, so that's talk.
His performance was caught on a student's camera and has now gone viral.
No, I did not. I had no idea.
It's unclear if anyone even made a complaint, but his bosses decided it was a violation of the teacher's code of conduct and chose not to renew his contract.
It's a stretch of the interpretation saying I engaged with students in inappropriate behavior.
Mastronardi says he was shocked by the punitive decision, since there are no official rules instructing teachers to censor readings of American classics at West Valley.
Nice to meet you.
We caught up with Superintendent Kyle Rydell and asked for an explanation.
You guys aren't going to renew Matthew Mastronardi's contract. I'm not aware of that, sir. Like I said, it's a personnel matter. It goes through HR.
However, word is now getting out into the Spokane, Washington community.
It's a good book to read, but I don't think that teachers should be saying it.
And while some think Mastronardi used poor judgment,
and also he was white, he shouldn't have said it.
There's now a Change.org petition with hundreds of signatures asking the district to bring him back.
Because he's a really good teacher.
It was started by freshman Peyton Johnson.
He was just reading out of the book. He wasn't saying it to anyone or in a rude manner.
Meanwhile, the city's black community is also starting to chime in.
We need to educate our kids more.
Michael Brown runs a job training program for high school kids and says the N-word remains deeply offensive to African Americans.
Once again, it goes back to ignorance, which means a lack of knowledge.
but is also glorified by athletes and entertainers in pop culture.
I love black people, but I hate niggas.
So Brown says intent and context matter.
It depends on how it's stated. When it all boils down, I think people need to know the truth.
In this case, he says the district made the wrong call.
And we got to quit shying away from that or being so sensitive.
You want to tell us what really happened?
Mastronardi is an Air Force veteran, also the school's assistant wrestling coach, and a father of 3.
They're 4, 2, and 6 months old. And
he's now appealing to the school board at the end of the month. Do you still stand by your decision to read the N-word out loud from this book?
my conscience is clean, and if I could rewind to that exact moment, I would not do anything differently.
Hoping this ends up turning into a teachable moment.
Okay, so no joke, I still actually have my original copy from grade 10, back when I could actually see text that small. And I don't remember it being a big deal, per se, even when we read it in class aloud. It was just, this is the context of the book. But nonetheless, so today we are joined by Matthew Mastronardi. Hi, thank you so much for being with us today.
Hey, it's great to be with you all. I'm really thankful for the invitation.
So on this podcast, we have had other teachers who have found themselves in situations like yours where they were trying to uphold what was best for their students, helping them think critically and so on. So we're so excited to have you here to have this discussion and learn more about what inspired you to, I think, do the right thing in this situation, but that's just my opinion. So to begin, can you tell our listeners a bit more about you, maybe about your career and what brought you to this point?
Yeah. So I grew up in Spokane, Washington, which for anybody who doesn't know, Washington State, not the capital. And that's in like the northwest corner. And I'm a little closer to the Idaho border. But that's kind of where I live. And I grew up here and I went to college to be a teacher. And I eventually graduated with my teaching degree. And I entered the military shortly after graduating from college. And so there in the video, you saw a picture of me in my uniform. I was in the Air Force for 4 years. And when I got out, after 4 years, I jumped right back into teaching, moved back home. And at this time, I had a wife and kids. And so I've been teaching for the last 4 years. I taught for 1 year at an elementary school. And then I did 3 years at the high school, which is where I just left. And yeah, I've always strived to be a genuine, authentic teacher who doesn't necessarily shy away from meeting genuine student curiosity with real context. And my philosophy on teaching is like the classroom is supposed to be a place of guided exploration to learn critical thinking. And sometimes, the subject matter is important, but so is helping form young minds to learn how to think and not to stifle creativity as so often happens in public school. A student might ask a thought-provoking question and they're told, no, we can't talk about that right now. And they get the door slammed shut in their face. And it's just, I don't want to be that type of teacher. And so, I respect my subject matter, but I also respect my students enough to trust them with the truth. I think that's important, to trust these high schoolers with the truth and help them form their own opinions about things, but not to hold anything back. And so that's what I've always tried to do as a teacher.
So you said the word context, and I think at least in the reading that I've done about this incident, we'll call it, I think context is missing. There's actually one headline that I read yesterday, and it was obviously from an unreputable source, but it said that Mastronardi read To Kill a Mockingbird aloud at a Juneteenth celebration. I'm like, I don't think that that's at all what happened or even close to it, but just an example of context severely missing, and I think maybe a certain narrative trying to be pushed about you. So I'm wondering if you can talk a bit more about the context, and you sort of touched on it, but the context within which you decided to make this decision to read the book as it's written.
Yeah. So I teach Spanish. I actually hadn't seen the headline that you were referring to. That's funny. But I'm a high school Spanish teacher, right? My job is to teach Spanish and help kids understand concepts of language. And it was towards the end of the day, and I was pacing around the room because the students, we had done the lesson, now they're working on an assignment, and there's a lot of side chatter that goes on, and students and I'm always walking around, and sometimes I listen, and as a teacher, you get really good at hearing conversations all across the room. Like I can pay attention to 3 or 4 conversations at once. And I heard these girls talking about the book To Kill a Mockingbird, which they're assigned to read in their English class. And the part where I jumped in, I heard them saying that they have to skip over a naughty word. Everyone knows what word it is. And I just said, really? You have to skip over the word? So I kind of jumped into their conversation a little bit calmly, but I expressed my disagreement because I love literature. I have a deep respect for historical books, and, you know, I don't think you should undermine the historical context by only reading the parts that make you comfortable.
Mhm.
And so I just expressed that sentiment and, telling them that the author chose each word intentionally, and you distance yourself from the meaning when you decide to only read the parts you like. Well, and it really started a candid, spontaneous, but I think really important conversation. And yeah, I went off script a little bit, but I think the lesson was important. And I didn't intend to take the rest of the period to talk about this, but it was just a short little thing. Well, a girl asked me, well, Mr. Mastronardi, if you were reading the book, would you say the word? And I said, yes, if I was reading To Kill a Mockingbird, I would read every word. And then a boy student who is one of my favorite students, actually, he had the book, he opened it, and he went to the page, and he brought me the book, and he pretty much said, okay, do it. And the entire class was staring at me, and I felt like I was past the point of no return because I had just sort of talked up this game that we should read books as written.
Mhm.
And I don't know. I just felt like I had to do it because these kids are growing up in an age, in a society that tells them that words are inherently evil. Words are inherently dangerous. Or you're only allowed to read this on certain conditions, which that's anti-educational. So I felt like I had to display a little bit of courage to just sort of dispel this myth that, oh, well, if you're black, you can read it, or if you're white, you can't. And I believe it's the duty of a learner to engage with the text honestly. You're not a racist, which that was the opinion of some of the students, but and a lot of them just didn't really have an opinion formed because they're sort of caught in this tension. They don't feel like they should have to censor themselves. They know they're not um, prejudice, but they also fear the consequences. So they're sort of in this tense. There's this tension, and I just had to display for them that no, you can read this. And I told them, look, you should never call anybody this. That would be despicable. But I'm reading from a book, and so I read a passage that, in full context, and I said the word that shall not be said, right? The N word. And I'm not going to say it here, obviously, because we try to maintain decorum. Yeah. And then that video was recorded, and there was a video, and it circulated around the school, and it made its way up to the school board. And I eventually lost my job over this.
Do you think it would have been made as big a deal if it wasn't recorded?
That's a good question. I think it probably would have. I'm actually glad the recording exists because you can tell I'm reading from a book
Mhm.
and can't dispute that. If there was no recording, you might be able to, it's like a game of telephone.
Yeah.
And now it's he said this, she said this. Oh, he didn't read it from the book. I was there. And so while it's unfortunate that the recording caused all of this, at least there's like an official record, I guess you could
Yeah.
say. And
Yeah.
so it's a double-edged sword, I think.
So, Oren, I'm sure you have a ton of questions, so I'll sit back for a minute and let you jump in.
Well, yeah, I mean, the sad thing is that we've watched over the last number of years, both in the States and in Canada, teachers getting away with indoctrination, okay, the actual indoctrination, harmful indoctrination, going beyond words, implanting ideas into people's minds, whereas you were trying to, literally give a lesson on language, right? Right. So, I mean, that's why we had to have you on. I mean, it's reprehensible that this is what happened. So, I'm not going to go off on a rant. I will ask you a couple of questions. And I've seen you in a few interviews. So, as of now, first of all, I don't know. Have you heard of or have you reached out to Warren Smith and the Secret Scholars Academy? Have you heard of that and have you reached out?
Yes. So I'm glad you met Warren Smith. I got to meet him, not in person, but we've just actually gone back and forth because he lost his teaching job.
We had him on this podcast. Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I got to know his story a little bit, but he made a video about an article that was written about me.
Oh, okay. I haven't checked it out yet. Okay.
Yeah. And I didn't know who he was before that, but I had a friend who sent me a video and I learned who Warren was and about his story. He did a live stream with me on his X account. And so, and we've gone back and forth. I interviewed him and yeah, I'm really fond of Warren and he's been a great person to get to know.
It's funny, when I saw your story, I thought of Warren right away. So that's cool. Yeah.
Okay. So, I mean, is it premature or you're not able to talk about whether you would be, thinking of teaching through that channel, that medium, the Secret Scholars Academy?
Yeah. So I have a YouTube channel and I've been trying to grow it.
Okay.
I don't know if there's opportunity to work with other platforms and other people teaching. I am trying to have grow my media presence a little bit to, talk about some of the underlying principles. And I've been able to meet a lot of great people and it's opened a lot of doors, but I'm just sort of taking it one day at a time. I do want to continue helping people learn. That's one of the things I think I'm gifted at, but yeah, I'm open to a lot of different things at the moment.
Okay. And so being open, so what recourse do you have? I mean, have you exhausted all the, avenues or are you still fighting? And are you untouchable right now? What do you foresee happening?
Yeah. So I am leaving every option on the table. I have some really smart people looking at my situation. So I guess I'll just leave it at that. There's two potential fights to pick, I guess, with the union, who I feel like did not represent me fairly and actually got in my way to actively resist me. And then you have the district itself, who I think there's a case that can be made that they retaliated against my viewpoints on a free speech issue. And so there's angles, but at some point you do have to let the past be the past. And so I've been really trying to pray over it and deliberate, like when do you let this story and this what happened to me sort of just move on to newer and bigger and better things. So after some really qualified people are done looking at this, I think it'll probably be time to just continue in something new.
Okay. And if I can just ask one more thing, Malini, before
Yeah.
Yeah. So, from what I know about the story and the way you described it now, there are some people who they want to they want to create a situation, use as a launching pad, use it to glorify themselves or bring attention to themselves, and others will capitalize on a situation. Okay. In this case, I mean, it sounds quite clearly that, it was let's say a conflict or just a sequence of events that happened that brought you to where you are. It wasn't premeditated. You weren't trying to make a stand aside from in that moment trying to make a teaching point, right? So when things like this happen, if you said, you know what, this day I'm going to do this, I know there's a risk, but I'm prepared to take it, whatever, that's one thing. Here, this is so, I'm going to say unjust, unwarranted, unfair, right? And you had the rug pulled out from under you in what I consider to be just a reprehensible way, especially, as I said, given how so many other teachers are able to get away with, just reprehensible conduct, right? So, and I'm saying this as someone who is not religious, but I know you have talked about your faith. You mentioned it a little while ago, and Malini is a person of faith. So would you say that what role would you say your faith your family, your upbringing, all these different important factors. What roles do they play in giving you the persistence and the resilience to not be devastated by this?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I believe that God ordains everything, that even, a hair will not fall off my head unless the Lord allows it to. And I'm glad you mentioned it. Yeah, because this obviously was not premeditated. There's no way I could have woken up that morning knowing that this was going to happen. There are so many teachers who have these TikTok accounts where they're constantly filming themselves throughout the day at work, and they talk about the lessons they're going to plan, which are ideologically motivated, and they're planning these things and they're sharing it and broadcasting it to the world. I'm active on social media, but I've never posted something that I am doing at work or anything like that. I've never tried to use my platform as a teacher to make a viral situation. That's something that's never even entered my mind. But I was confronted with the situation, and I'm trying to go through it with wisdom. And so I'm having people pray for me. I've had meetings with my pastor at my church who, hey, can you give me some advice? And, one thing he encouraged me to do is, don't be combative, and remember that you are not a martyr. Don't get martyr complex, because and it's absolutely right. It's like I'm not the last bastion for free speech on the face of the planet. There's a lot of great, courageous people out there who are, faced with situations that are not ideal, and they're being faithful, and maybe they didn't get any media publicity and they're just doing it, and they have the merits of it being a secret, right? Which is almost even more noble in a lot of ways, because it's like, even when there's no attention, you are still being faithful to the truth. And so, the Bible talks a lot about, like, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, essentially. And so I've sort of, I can't point to like one Bible verse but like there's just the overall spirit would be, don't be boastful, don't be prideful, remain humble. And I think that's just what I'm trying to do to the best of my ability. And, I'm fortunate that I get regular touch points with reality. Even, it's very flattering to be asked to go on a podcast and to speak on something that I care about a lot. Like it means a lot. But I could totally see how it could go to your head very quickly, and you could try to become rich and famous or whatnot. But like, I'm a family man. I have kids. I have to help them get ready in the mornings. I have to mow my lawn. I have to help. And so like, I think those are really good, like healthy doses to like remember, like, no, my life is not really extended beyond like this where I'm at. And so I try to have a humble view of myself in that way. And I'm not perfect at it, but I'm doing my best. And so all of that to kind of answer your question.
Okay, well, you touched upon the faith part, which was how I opened it up with. And what about, I'm assuming, again, from what I've seen, things haven't changed, but your wife, the role that your wife, the rest of your family plays in the strength. It's just because Malini and I were always encouraging people to, to prudently, speak out when something's wrong, to try to do what you can to, to fix the system if it's possible and so on. So whenever someone has actually done that, once again, it wasn't premeditated, just you found yourself here and you're trying to do it with grace and humility. I think it's important for people to understand what factors might go into, someone not staying quiet, someone's, living by principle or living in line with their principles and so on. So if you can sort of, again, talk a little bit more about the other elements, maybe, your wife, your family, your upbringing, that, as you say, you're not, the fact that you're not playing a martyr, I'm so glad that you said that, because I have seen so many people either thrust into this position or adopting this position, and they, become the martyr, and they might either, like, it's quite clear it's all about them. Okay. Mm-hmm. Or, and they make it clear, or they're pretending it's about some other greater cause, but in reality, you see, it's just about them. They want that, right? And if you have a higher, not a power, but a higher purpose guiding you, you conduct yourself very differently. I think that's what we're seeing with you. So again, if you just should put together the elements that allow you to do this so people can have hope and say, you know what, I might be able to do the same thing if I find myself in a similar situation.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. It's good to think about this in that way, I think. The worst thing about making yourself a martyr is like you lose sight of everybody else who's doing amazing work. And like it's so hard to just do something single-handedly, right? Like I would hope that I'm doing my best in this spot that I'm in to really highlight like the importance of historical and literary honesty, which downstream from that is it's really about the truth. And so because I have a high regard for the truth, and I think I've always been a man of conviction, and that's just been something that's been instilled in me from my parents. I've always been one to like really, I don't know, have a deep sense of like right and wrong. And I think that's where, my faith plays into that. And, now my family, having kids, what type of world do I want my daughters and my son to grow up in? I don't want them to live in a world where the color of their skin dictates whether they are allowed to read a book honestly or not. I don't want them to live in that world. So I want to, with tact, fight to make changes to shift the Overton window, I guess you could say, because, that's where a lot of ideas get filtered out. And we want ideas that are faithful to the truth, faithful to the fabric of reality to be where we live. We want to live in that world. Freedom starts by conforming to the truth. And so, it's great to have a wife who's really supportive. I obviously like this would be so much harder without a faithful spouse, because at the end of the night when you're putting your phone away, your kids are down, just to be able to have somebody to like talk to and somebody to encourage you. I mean, you can't put a price on that. Like if I were just living in some bubble by myself and cooped up in an apartment or something and relying only on myself, like I would probably make a lot of mistakes.
Okay. And sorry, Mel, just one last thing. When you talk about what world do I want my children to grow up in? And you're saying about like, being afraid or not being able to read certain literature, right? And I think it goes beyond that. You've touched upon it, which is a child who's raised in a culture of fear, of anxiety, that anything I say that was okay yesterday, today may be verboten, might be somehow be dangerous. As you said, words are not dangerous, but that's what they're being taught. And again, if you belong to this group, you're allowed to say this, but you can't do that, et cetera, et cetera. It's just so divisive, so harmful. So I really am glad. I mean, again, it's very unfortunate that you've found yourself in this position, right? But I do hope that the factors that you've mentioned do enable you to continue, find some kind of recourse, or at least a path forward that allows you to continue to do what you're doing and to speak truth and to try to better society. And by society, I always tell people, you're not going to change the world. You may not change your society, but the little circle around you, that's our society. And when there are people who are trying to do that on a daily basis, it's really sad that they're being, shut down and shut up. So I really do hope that your voice, continues to be broadcast. And, maybe not so public, it's not so widespread, but, in some form.
Yeah. You talk about like words in our language shapes your perception of reality. And when certain words are banned or censored, it can shape your perception of the world around you. Right? I've been reading a lot about censorship, and I learned recently, like when Stalin was, he ruled the Soviet Union, there was a time where the words famine, starvation, truth, liberty were all banned. You couldn't actually like publish anything that contained these words or that, talked about what they are. And how long goes by until like that actually starts to remove itself, like those concepts of liberty and freedom become absent from the substance of your thoughts because the language was controlled, and downstream from that is your perception of the world. And it works both ways. And I'm not saying, hey, anybody should use really sharp, offensive words, but it's a very slippery slope when you start to remove some of them, because every word, right? I've been saying it earlier, is not inherently dangerous. It's the intent and the heart behind its usage. And we need to help kids understand the difference. A sane society can look at a word used in different contexts and discriminate between them and not have an emotional collapse. And I think that's important.
And I think largely the concept of impact versus intent is being misconstrued in your situation. I heard in the news clip, it sounded like they were almost applying that in a positive sense. But I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think by and large, people view that as a negative, as like, well, that's fine that that was your intention, but the impact is still terrible. But I think the converse is in fact true.
Yeah. We can't make our decisions based on all decisions based on how we think somebody's going to respond, especially if it's something about the truth, right? We don't conform the truth to us. We conform ourselves to the truth. And sometimes, like if it's a difficult subject, it needs to be done with sensitivity and care.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that. I'm not saying we could just, be unsensitive. I'm not saying that at all. But like this idea of like, oh, telling this person the truth is going to offend them, so therefore we have to, not do it.
Mm-hmm.
That is a recipe for disaster. Even in my country, like when with the U.S. Constitution, when we don't read it as written and we only pick the parts that we like to emphasize, and look at all the problems we're having now. I mean, I could go on, but it's just the impact should be considered, but you should modify your delivery.
Yes.
It doesn't mean you don't deliver the truth at all, right? And if you're talking to a child versus an adult, if this person is from this part of the country or that part of like all of that should be taken into consideration, but we can't lose an ounce of truth because we're afraid of the impact. We have to move forward with it.
Yeah, and it's awfully convenient that people pick and choose when to look at things in that context, and not to veer too much into religion. But this is true of perhaps Christians who are pushing a certain agenda. And I am a Christian, so I'm saying this from the lens of my experiences, that we will often pick and choose what will suit the narrative rather than looking at the Bible as it is and the truth as the truth. And I think this happens across many contexts.
Yeah, I mean, and I mentioned the Constitution, but like the Bible's another really good example of when you only read the parts that make you comfortable, you like. It's like maybe men are competing in women's sports today because not enough people like want to read the parts of the Bible that says that God made them male and female, and there's actual biblical and religious authority to like back this up, not just like aside from biological truths, there's actually a God who made them male and female, and now we're blurring that line. And I'm not saying Christians are responsible for that, but it's like we have a duty to speak up and call it out, and then maybe things wouldn't be as bad.
So on the topic of faith, and I think you somewhat touched on this, but do you feel that this situation that you found yourself in has a higher meaning?
Yes, because all truth is God's truth. I really don't think it's about a word. I don't think it's about a passage from a book. That's just the vehicle through which this was which we arrived here. This is about honesty and truth-telling in education. And I think we're seeing a system that's crying out that, we can't have that much honesty and truth-telling. Or a teacher who does this too much will become a liability because he doesn't fall in line with what we deem orthodox. And I think they saw me as potentially becoming a loose cannon. And whether or not that's not true, right? I worked there for 3 years, and this is the one thing that's ever really come up. But I do think there's a higher meaning, because downstream from all this is, are teachers allowed to tell the truth? And as a Christian, as a citizen, I think we have to be able to speak the truth. And there's a whole lot of consequences when you self-censor yourself from doing that. And so, and I think there's a lesson of courage through all of this as well. It's like, we've had a lot of issues regarding truth. Like, we had a girl who, she lost to a boy in the state track and field championships 2 years in a row, to the same boy, because he is competing in the girls' division. And people self-censor themselves to speak up.
Mhm.
And nothing changes. And so, I sort of view it all in the same category of, are we allowed to speak the truth? Is the classroom a place where we use the truth to help us think critically, and we can speak it unabashedly?
Yeah, and I think what I'm about to say is probably blatantly obvious throughout this conversation, but I think it still is worth mentioning that I really believe that the the basis of your decision to do this, um, if it was not regarding something that was ideologically viewed, you probably wouldn't be finding yourself in this situation. But people are failing to and refusing to listen to what you're saying about truth and critical thinking and giving students what they deserve, which is an education that may cause some discomfort, but done in the right context is what they deserve.
Yeah, an honest education is the only one worth having. And if the classroom can't be a place where students are taught to understand, right? Then where are they going to find their understanding? They're going to find it among their peers who don't have the same experience, don't have the same years of life experience. They haven't acquired much wisdom yet. And so, what's better, to have a teacher um, confront the ugliness of history and be able to help students understand that, or skip over it, and then outside of the classroom, the students are talking about it amongst themselves, and it's sort of like the blind leading the blind,
Mhm.
essentially. And that's where cycles that you're trying to cut off from repeating, it's fertile soil for um, them to sort of get perpetuated, because then kids might approach um, difficult ideas or concepts that are um, hard to deal with. They might make light of them. They might turn them into jokes. And then, down the line, it's like we lose control of sort of these things that it was a hard lesson that we had to learn. And then it's just going to perpetuate all over again. It's like education was never meant to be safe, never meant to be polite,
Yeah.
but it's about understanding. And that the road to get there can be uncomfortable.
Yeah, and I think you make such a fabulous point there as far as in this effort to censor such things, I think matters are being made worse, like you said, because now kids are going to talk about this stuff regardless, but they're not doing it with the appropriate guardrails or guidance or framing context and so on. And we're just making a bad situation worse. And something you said earlier reminded me, I think, of something Warren said when he was on here that part of the challenge he experienced, and I think is what you're experiencing, is um, schools and colleges are teaching kids what to think, not how to think, and that's obviously very problematic.
Yeah. There's a certain spectrum of orthodoxy that you're sort of allowed. It's the Overton window. I know some people don't like that term, but you call it a spectrum, whatever you want, and you're allowed to stay in there. But as soon as you challenge one of the main statutes of, the progressive secular ideologies, what they've determined to be orthodox, and actually help a student think, right? You can disagree with me, but at least think about it critically. And I can respect that. But we're seeing that, even trying to help the students think, like, that's not what they're seeing in this case. They're saying, "Oh, you didn't fall in line." And so the public school system, it's revealing itself more and more as to be a place to train people to fall in line.
Right. And, a lot of people, there's memes, there's videos, there'd be an actual scholarship over the fact that seems to be what schools have long been, factories, like to produce good citizens, good workers, whatever, mindless workers, right? Whereas the other school of thought, of course, is as we're talking about academia, education, it is to educate, to teach critical thinking. And I just want to tie in with a couple of things that you said. One, you mentioned truth many times, and we're in a situation right now, and I hate this. Whenever one of my patients says this or a student, I stop and I go, no, when they talk about my truth. I go, no, no, no. There is truth. You have my experience, my opinion, my belief. I don't care, but it's not your truth. There is truth, writ large. So, but that's what we're becoming. We're becoming okay, well, fine. You can have your truth. I'll have my truth. And without a unified truth, without being able to agree on basic facts, how do you have a coherent society?
Yeah.
So
you can't. And I think a lot of the violence and unrest that we see, and it's all sitting right in front of us today, where we're reaping the benefits of that ethos, is this idea that you have your truth, I have my truth. And there's one of the big problems, and I've mentioned, I've been reading a lot of Neil Postman. He's becoming one of my favorite authors. He talks about how one of the biggest problems in public school systems is walk in the door and ask somebody, "What are you doing here?" And you will not get a meaningful answer. The public school system can't answer that question. Or if anything, the highest virtue, the highest ideal that they can serve is so that students can get a good job. I truly believe that. And you ask 10 different kids, what are you doing here? 10 different teachers, what are you doing here? There's no transcendent narrative that unifies the purpose for which we're coming together. And I think that's one of the big problems, because when that's the case, you can only teach on a very narrow, for a very narrow purpose that is very vague. And it doesn't actually feed the human soul. It doesn't help somebody grow in what it means to be a person. And so I think you see a lot of people come out of that harmed and deprived of purpose and belonging, because a public school at least, it puts on this facade that it's a community, but it's not. It's a network. And when he talks about this in his books. It's like when a community pretends to be a network, people get harmed. Families, students, faculty, everything. Because it's pretending to care about you in these certain areas of your life, which only a community is really meant to feed. And you can't be a part of 15 communities. You just can't. There's not enough bandwidth. You have your family and maybe your church and maybe like one other community. But the school taking on all these paternalistic responsibilities, faking it. They're pretending, because they can't actually meet that need on this large scale mass operation that they have going on. It's, they say, oh, you'll always have a home here. They say things like that. But do you really? And then they ask students to open up about all these inner thoughts that they're having, and trying to pry into like the secrets of their lives, and that's when you do that as a network. I think students can learn to have trust issues, and there's all sorts of identity things that go on, especially because you're distancing people from their families when that's their role. And yeah, so I mean, I could go on, but sorry.
And as a side note to that, and yeah, they're not therapists, right? But they're trying to take on that pseudo role of talking about their feelings and their identity and so on and so forth, but they're just not equipped to do it.
Mhm.
Right. And just a little a point of order. You earlier when you mentioned that, you said that the school, you're saying that it was a community masquerading as a network. You meant it was a network masquerading as a community, I
Oh,
believe.
yes, I'm sorry. Yeah, it's a
Yeah, so
network masquerading as a community,
just wanted to,
and yeah,
yeah.
thank you for
Yeah,
highlighting that.
so I was going to say, I mean, there's a reason that we chose the name for our podcast, Awake at the Wheel, because the people in charge, whether it's education, whether it's mental health, whatever it is, we've noticed that the people, who should be, let's say, promulgating all these, the ethos that you mentioned, well, the good one, you talk about the bad one, but the proper ones, the principles of education, et cetera, or whatever it happens to be, it seemed that they were all asleep at the wheel over the past number of decades, which is why we find ourselves here. And you also mentioned courage. I've mentioned a number of times in a number of interviews. I understand the need to feed your family. I understand the need to maintain your reputation, or maybe your professional community network, whatever you want to call it. I get that. But I can also say that I can call out cowardice when I see it. And you were talking about the courage, and the people in charge, the people who should have been awake at the wheel but fell asleep. Either they're lacking in critical thinking capacity, in having the right, the right purpose, having the courage, the integrity, the wherewithal to, manage a very difficult situation. If someone drops the ball, that's one thing. If someone, I don't know, doesn't even try to grab the ball, but they're open and they should be getting the ball, like that's something entirely different. And this is what I'm saying. And I'm sure I don't know, up until, all this happened, were you aware of how badly the system, was, let's say, broken at the top, or were you able to sort of insulate yourself and do your job and teach the way you want to teach? How did you see the world before and after this whole kerfuffle?
Yeah. I think it's a little bit of both. I've seen examples of just egregious decisions being made that I'm like, man, this feels like it's a slap in the face to just what's plainly obvious. Like boys competing in girls' sports and things like that, or some of the messaging that comes down from the higher ups where a lot of the big decisions are made, and it's enforcing an ideological agenda, or at least trying to perpetuate it. And so, yeah, you see that. Some people don't, because it aligns perfectly with their worldview. But for
Mhm.
somebody who is maybe a little bit more traditional, or maybe call me conservative, it there's some red flags for sure. At the end of the day, I like to go home. I like to, get off work and clock out, and so I think it's a little bit of both. I didn't ever see myself being at the center of a controversy like this, and so I got to experience it firsthand, because people that I really respected, had immense respect for, all of a sudden pretend I don't exist.
Cowardice.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, and there's been some support behind closed doors, but it's very, very few and far in between. Um, even from the leadership, there was leadership that I respected and I acknowledged. Okay, you're the leader. I'm following you in doing things that I thought were really respectable, but to not appreciate any nuance in the situation, but to feel the pressure. I don't know exactly where the pressure was coming from, if it's from the school board or outside organizations or the union, and to sort of just ignore the past 3 years. And a lot of those intimate, like maybe not intimate, but like a lot of those really great moments we had as colleagues, right? That I thought we had a relationship, and and to just ignore all that. It's just like, man, I got a taste for like what the system can sort of, the worst side of it, I think. It takes a good person who I thought I, had a lot of respect for, and now how quickly loyalty can be eroded, I guess.
You did bring up that one other thing, which is why a lot of people don't speak up. I mean, I can't call it anything other than a betrayal on every level.
Mhm.
Okay. So I just have to ask you, when you've been betrayed this badly on all these different levels, I mean, the only thing that hasn't been betrayed, it seems like, is your faith in your family, okay? Or maybe some close friends, but like you're able to, at least that is solid. That's kind of your rock in all of this. But the other betrayals, like, how do you take that in stride? Because again, I want other people to sort of take hope from this and say, I'm prepared to deal with the betrayal that's going to come.
So you're right. Like my family and my close friends and my faith circle have been very supportive. The one group we didn't really get to talk about was the students. And I think they are what really motivated me through all of this, and just seeing the way that they fought for me.
That's amazing.
It was I I can't say, out of all the people that, quote unquote betrayed me, man, the students were faithful. And maybe there's a couple here and there, and like you saw in the video, there's those that disagree, but like my students, the one that were in my class, the ones who I've had in previous years, when push came to shove, they put their money where their mouth was. They showed up, they mobilized, they organized, and on their summer vacation, a lot of them showed up to the school board meeting, which is at 8 o'clock in the morning, which is a very uncommon time to do a school board meeting. They showed up and they made public comments, and they made a Instagram fan page for me, and they were mobilizing their friends, and I just saw, like, man, I'm so proud of these kids, because like this is like applying courage. This isn't talking about it and reading about it. You're actually applying it, and you're using the means that you have, which as a 14, 15, 16-year-old, they're not many, but you're using it and you care deeply about this. And so that was something that really sustained me, I think, was just seeing them, and like, man, I can't turn my back on them now. So I have to keep going. And, their families and the community, the support that they showed, I felt unworthy of it, to be honest.
Well, for what it's worth, from everything I've heard, I hope you do feel that you are worthy of it, because
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah. Okay. Like really. And I respect it. I appreciate it. And I take heart from it, because, again, you're not a martyr, and we all know how it ends for martyrs. Okay. And you're not acting like one. I think you're acting like a man with principle, right? Who sees a bigger picture, who has courage, who has integrity. And I think that those qualities are in short supply. So, again, when we see someone who evinces them, we feel it's our duty to say, let's get them on and see if we can get them on, because we want other people to see it as well.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
So we often end the podcast with giving our listeners something to take away, as far as something tangible that they can do with all of this. And I think, to echo some of what Oren just said, by and large, I think the takeaway from your experience with this is that you live a life that is in line with your morals, with your ethics. You do the right thing, even if it's the hard thing to do. So with that framing, what can people do in their lives, in their day-to-day lives, in their jobs?
Yeah, that's a great question, because how do you apply all this, right? If you don't actually apply it, it's kind of worthless. I mean, just off the topic of courage, like we were talking about, I'm sure there's a lot of ways to answer this question, but I heard once that courage is the virtue upon which all others rest. It's like a Jenga tower. It's like that bottom one. If you take one of them out, the whole thing comes down. You could have patience, patriotism, all these other virtues that are rest on top of that. But if you don't actually have courage to live those out, those are sort of meaningless. And so I think one thing people can do is find a hero who's dead, like an author or somebody from history that is no longer alive, who wrote some things down, and find somebody who you have a special connection with across time, and read about what that person did, who in times where he or she lived out courage, because there's a lot of power in being able to summon somebody up from the grave and to be able to like feel like you have this, like they're speaking to you almost. And so that's something that for me has meant a lot, is like having some of these archetypes that I can summon out of the grave and I can feel like they're talking to me, even though they're not, but they're I can apply what they wrote down and learn from their experiences, and courage is contagious. And so when you can read about it firsthand and feel like you're experiencing that thing with that person, I think that that's really helpful. And so find a good book, find a biography, an autobiography, and read about somebody who displayed courage in the past.
Amazing. Okay. Well, Matthew, thank you so much for being with us. I truly admire the work that you're doing, the message that you're putting out there. And of course, we so appreciate you being here and chatting with us.
Yeah, certainly. And sorry, what were you going to say?
No, I was just gonna say thank you to both of you, and it takes a special people to appreciate nuance, especially in our day and age. And so I got some catching up to do on some of your episodes, and I look forward to it. And it's just been great to meet you guys. And thank you from the bottom of my heart for allowing me to share my story.
Of course.
Thank you. So on that inspirational note, until next time, keep your eyes on the road and your hands upon the wheel.
Thank you.